The story of the Arellano Félix brothers didn't begin with poverty or desperation. It began with proximity to power. They weren't street kids clawing their way up. They were relatives of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the godfather who once ruled over all of Mexico's drug trade. While others bled to enter the game, they were born at the table. And when Félix Gallardo was arrested in 1989, the empire he built shattered into pieces. Those pieces became cartels. And the Arellano Félix brothers? They took one of the most powerful, Tijuana. Tijuana wasn't just any border city. It was the crown jewel, a gateway into California, the sixth largest economy in the world at the time. Every kilo of cocaine, every ounce of heroin that crossed there was worth 10 times more once it touched American soil. Whoever controlled Tijuana didn't just make money, they controlled the future of the trade. The brothers understood this, and they didn't waste time. They turned Tijuana into their fortress. They inherited the roots, the contacts, the protection rackets. But they weren't content with just holding the keys. They wanted to reinforce the walls, arm the guards, and own the gate itself. They moved quickly, securing corrupt officials, establishing front businesses, and forming alliances with Colombian suppliers. But they also brought something new, a multi-headed leadership structure. While most cartels centered around one man, the Arellano Félix brothers operated like a boardroom of killers. Each sibling had a role. Each one had authority. And, most dangerously, they trusted each other completely. This unity made them harder to infiltrate, harder to break. There was no single head to cut off. If one brother went down, another stepped up. If one shipment was lost, another landed the next day. They didn't react, they anticipated. Their rise was quick, but not sloppy. Their violence was strategic, their alliances deeply rooted. They weren't reckless, they were precise. By the early 90s, they had transformed Tijuana into a narco stronghold, one that ran smoother, faster, and deadlier than any cartel before it. While the world focused on Escobar's fall in Colombia, a quieter, colder storm was brewing in Baja California. And at its center stood a bloodline, sharpened not by struggle, but by inheritance. The Arellano Félix cartel wasn't led by one man with a crown. It was led by 7 siblings with a blueprint. They didn't operate like a gang. They operated like a corporate dynasty, a brutal, organized, hyper-efficient family machine. At the top of the hierarchy stood Benjamin Arellano Félix, the strategist. Calm, calculating, and cold, Benjamin wasn't interested in chaos. He wanted control. He knew how to bribe without being seen, how to build alliances that lasted longer than bullets, and how to play both sides of the law without blinking. Then there was Ramon, the opposite of his brother in every way. Ramon didn't negotiate. He eliminated. He didn't sit in meetings. He led executions. With his slicked-back hair, designer suits, and gold-plated firearms, Ramon was the face of terror. His presence alone made rivals fold, and his appetite for theatrical violence made him infamous. He was the executioner of the family. The one you sent when talking had failed, or when you simply wanted to send a message soaked in blood. But the family didn't stop with those two. Eduardo, Francisco Javier, and Francisco Rafael kept the logistics running, coordinating routes, pilots, bribes, and money laundering operations that spanned from San Diego to Panama. Their job was to ensure product moved smoothly and money never stopped flowing. In a world of chaos, they were the gears behind the machine, silent, steady, necessary. And then there was Enedina Arellano Félix, the sister, the one most people ignored until it was too late. With a background in accounting and a mind sharper than any cartel lawyer, Enedina was the family's financial architect. She avoided the spotlight, but everyone knew she was the one balancing the empire's books. And when her brothers fell, one by one, it was Enedina who kept the empire from crumbling. Not through violence, through intelligence. The siblings operated with military discipline. They didn't just trust each other, they functioned like a unified body. If one was wounded, the others responded. If one failed, another compensated. There was no betrayal, no fracture, no disloyalty. Because blood was thicker than cocaine. This structure was unheard of in the cartel world. Most organizations collapsed the moment their leader was removed. But the Arellano Félix brothers had built something different, something smarter. They made themselves indestructible, not because they couldn't be caught, but because they couldn't be isolated. By the early 90s, they weren't just dominating Tijuana. They were exporting their leadership model to other cartels. Multi-headed command, compartmentalized operations, financial sophistication. They had redefined what a drug empire looked like. Not chaotic, not loud, but coordinated, invisible, and deadly efficient. And in a world ruled by firepower, the Arellano Félix brothers proved that true power didn't just come from violence. It came from organization, from loyalty, from family, and from building a cartel so synchronized, it felt inevitable. Tijuana wasn't just a border city. Under the Arellano Félix brothers, it became a stronghold, militarized, fortified, weaponized. Most cartels operated in the shadows. The Arellano Félix cartel ruled in broad daylight. They didn't hide from the city. They became the city. From city hall to the police precincts, from customs checkpoints to local newsrooms, everything had a price, and the brothers were always paying. Police chiefs took orders from cartel lieutenants. Judges were bought before trials began. Mayors were handpicked or removed. If the government couldn't be bribed, it was burned. If a journalist published the wrong story, they vanished. If a rival stepped foot on their turf, their body was left hanging from a bridge, a warning with no words needed. They didn't just control the flow of drugs, they controlled the flow of fear, and they invested in it like a business. Hitmen weren't just recruited, they were trained. Safe houses weren't just hidden, they were networked. Money didn't move in duffel bags. It moved through shell companies and offshore accounts. Their intelligence network was unmatched. They listened in on police radios. They tapped government phones. Surveillance teams tracked movements across the city. They knew what prosecutors were planning before the warrants were printed. Nothing happened in Tijuana without them knowing. Nothing moved without their blessing. And what made it terrifying wasn't just their control, it was how normalized it all became. Civilians paid protection fees like taxes. Businesses accepted cartel rules like laws. Even honest cops looked the other way, not out of greed, but out of survival. Tijuana's skyline was shadowed by luxury homes and cartel mansions. In the hills, parties roared until sunrise. Luxurious cars, imported champagne, narco corridos echoing across the valley. But down below, in the barrios, bodies turned up daily. People disappeared without a trace, and mothers taught their children not to ask questions, just to walk fast and keep their heads down. This wasn't just territorial dominance. This was systemic occupation. Tijuana didn't belong to the Mexican government. It belonged to a family. And unlike other cartels that fought to take cities, the Arellano Félix brothers turned one into a capital. Not of business, not of politics, but of organized terror. They didn't just rule Tijuana, they owned its silence. Every empire eventually meets its rival. For the Arellano Félix brothers, that rival had a name: Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, leader of the Sinaloa Cartel. Ambitious, patient, ruthless. And unlike the brothers, Chapo didn't inherit his power. He built it, gram by gram, tunnel by tunnel. In the early 1990s, the border became too small for both titans. Sinaloa wanted access to California, but Tijuana was locked down under Arellano Félix control. What began as business tension quickly spiraled into all-out war. This wasn't a quiet turf dispute. This was a public bloodbath. Clubs, hotels, airports. No place was sacred. No time was safe. It started with ambushes. Sinaloa sicarios attacking convoys on the highway. Then came car bombs, grenade assaults, and daylight executions. Both sides escalated. Both sides paid top dollar for intelligence. And both sides gave their killers one simple order: no survivors. Then came the turning point. May 24th, 1993. Guadalajara Airport. Gunfire erupted in the middle of the terminal. Chaos. Civilians screaming. When it ended, 6 people lay dead, including Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, a Catholic cardinal. The official story: mistaken identity. The target was El Chapo. The shooters thought the cardinal's car was his, but many didn't buy it. How could the most powerful religious figure in the country be mistaken for a drug lord? Some said it was a message. Others said it was revenge. One thing was certain: Mexico would never be the same. The international spotlight turned red hot. The Vatican demanded justice. The Mexican government, humiliated, cracked down. And suddenly, narco war wasn't just between cartels. It was between cartels and the entire Mexican state. Tijuana turned into a battlefield. Entire city blocks went into lockdown. Journalists were gunned down in front of their homes. Tourists vanished on the drive back from the border. The Arellano Félix brothers responded with more brutality, more fear. But El Chapo had something else: tunnels, mountains, and politicians in his pocket. Where the brothers ruled by dominance, El Chapo thrived through strategy. To most cartels, violence was a tool. To the Arellano Félix brothers, it was a brand. They didn't just kill to survive. They killed to send messages. Loud, public, unforgettable. Torture wasn't a side effect. It was policy. Death wasn't private. It was spectacle. A language spoken in chainsaws, acid barrels, and burning bodies hung from overpasses. The violence wasn't wild. It was systemized, packaged, delivered. They turned murder into a machine. Their sicarios weren't just gang members. They were trained soldiers, recruited young, indoctrinated fast, and loyal until death. Some came from the military, others from the streets. All of them wore uniforms, followed ranks, and answered to brothers who viewed them not as men, but as assets. Execution videos weren't leaks. They were marketing. Each one served a purpose: to silence rivals, to terrify witnesses, to remind an entire population that resistance meant disappearance. They had kill teams who operated on rotating shifts, escape vehicles staged in advance, weapons cleaned, serial numbers stripped, disposal teams on call. And behind every bloodstained street corner, there were spreadsheets. Payments to killers, bonuses for high-value targets, bribes to coroners, funeral homes, morgue staff. They didn't just run a drug operation. They ran a death economy. Even their alliances were enforced by terror. When Colombian suppliers hesitated to negotiate, the brothers didn't send lawyers. They sent bodies, dismembered, delivered, gift-wrapped in blood. And yet, for all their brutality, it worked. No one dared testify. No one filmed the aftermath. And the population, suffocating in fear, learned to live with silence. Stores opened the next day. Schools held class. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one ever said a word. That was the brilliance behind it. The Arellano Félix cartel didn't just spread violence. They created a system that made fear invisible. No propaganda, no speeches, no slogans. Just a silent agreement. Obey or vanish. Cooperate or burn. While politicians played press conferences, the brothers were perfecting an assembly line of intimidation. Their terror wasn't emotional, it was operational. And as long as the machine ran, no one, not cops, not rival cartels, not journalists, could stop it. Every empire bleeds, and eventually, every dynasty crumbles. The Arellano Félix brothers had built something brutal, brilliant, and nearly untouchable. But power, real power, doesn't just create enemies, it creates gravity. And over time, gravity pulls everything down. By the early 2000s, the machine had started to rust. The war with El Chapo's Sinaloa Cartel had drained their manpower, exposed their weaknesses, and most of all, drawn the full attention of the Mexican and U.S. governments. The first to fall was Ramon, the face of fear, the blood-soaked enforcer. In 2002, during what should have been a routine trip to Mazatlan, he walked into a military checkpoint. A shootout erupted. Bullets tore through the morning air. And just like that, the most feared man in Baja California was dead. Face down in the street, his reign ended in seconds. To many, it felt impossible. To others, inevitable. Then came Benjamin, the architect, the mind. Months after Ramon's death, DEA agents tracked him to Puebla, where he was arrested without a shot fired. The man who once sat above governments, who controlled ports, airports, and politics, was now in handcuffs, cold, quiet, caged. But the machine didn't stop. Not yet. Francisco Javier, another brother, another kingpin, tried to maintain control, but the enemies were closing in. Sinaloa was stronger. The government was better equipped. And inside the cartel itself, trust was evaporating. Sicarios began flipping. Corrupt officials were now cooperating. The silence that once protected them turned into noise. Court documents, leaked recordings, surveillance footage. One by one, lieutenants disappeared. Convoys were intercepted. Safe houses were raided. And yet, even as the brothers vanished into graves or prisons, the family did something no one expected. They adapted. When the men were gone, the sister stepped forward. Enedina Arellano Félix, the quiet one, the accountant in the shadows, became the boss. She lowered the heat, dialed back the violence, focused on money, on efficiency, on survival. The cartel shrank, but stabilized. Gone were the wild executions and flashy shows of force. In their place, quiet shipments, clean laundering, smaller margins, but longer life. The Tijuana cartel was no longer an empire, but it was still alive. And in the world of Mexican organized crime, survival is a superpower. The fall of the dynasty wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, clinical disassembly, piece by piece, brother by brother. And in the end, it wasn't justice that brought them down. It was pressure, time, and gravity. Today, the Tijuana cartel no longer dominates headlines, but the fingerprints of the Arellano Félix brothers are everywhere. From modern cartel logistics to media manipulation and financial laundering techniques, their blueprint lives on. In Narco corridos, their legend survives. On the streets of Tijuana, their name still echoes. They weren't just criminals, they were architects of a narco state. The world remembers Escobar and Chapo, but in the shadows, the Arellano Félix brothers built something just as terrifying. A machine that didn't just run on blood. It was designed to never stop running at all.